Hey guys, welcome to part 4 of our Unity tutorial on how to create a Moba. Now if you remember in the last video we were doing minion targeting and there was a small bug I came across when I was testing that. One of the issues we have, I'll just drag out a couple of minion prefabs, I'll just manually set them up, so destination to the other base, say that they're blue, and if I click on another prefab and do the same. The issue that we're having is pretty simple. It's just that when 2 or more minions attack one, we're getting an issue where there's a minion still in their targeting list. And we've been doing a loop to test, which is the closest minion. And essentially we're getting an issue, and this should come up here if they both target it. If I just move him in and target as well. Yeah, we're getting the issue here, and that's essentially on line 32. It's trying to reference a game object that isn't in the list. So what I'm going to do is I can delete those 2 prefabs I used to show that, and if we just go into the minion targeting AI script, and here we have the for each loop. Now what we need to do is basically, if there's a game object in this list that's been deleted, it will turn up as a null reference. So what we need to do is create a list, or while we're going through this list, is to delete that null reference. So instead of using a for each loop, we're going to use a for loop. So what we'll do here is just say for, and then we'll say variable I. We get the target list, and we say the count, and we say -1. So this is just going down the list, and it will go down the list for, oh sorry, that's an equals there. So yeah, we're setting up variable I, and it's going down the target list -1, meaning it will go down each time the count. And then as long as I is greater than -1, it hasn't finished, and then each iteration I is going down 1 further essentially. And so we'll want to use this for loop, and then within the for loop we need an if statement, and that if statement is if target list, and then the current target we're on is equal to null, then actually let's set it up as isn't equal to null, then we can run this code that we have already. So we'll just go through all this code and run it. Now in the case that it isn't null, or is null, sorry, we're going to want to say target list dot remove at, and then just I, which is the current game object, and that's just going to remove the current game object from the list. You'll also notice that just the syntax we were using before has changed slightly. So we'll just say target list I instead of target in these 2 positions. And there we go. So this is the exact same code, which is if the minion has a target in its list and it currently isn't targeting one of them, then we're going to go through the list, check which is the closest target. If it's a null target, or the game object doesn't exist, we'll remove it and then continue going through our for loop. And then at the end of that, we'll tell the target what its closest target is, and we'll set its variable that it has a target to true. So the script is pretty much exactly the same, but now we're not going to have that error. So if we just go back into Unity, and then I can just Control Z to bring back those 2 prefabs I deleted, and if we just run the test again. Another thing I'll do just very quickly is I'll go into the prefab. I think I'm going to make the target collider a little bit larger, because as they're going down the lane they were missing each other sometimes, so I'll just save that as well. And then if we click play, then we should see now we're not going to get that error message we were getting when 2 minions were attacking one and then one of them had it left on their list. So we'll just let that run through. And as you can see, the minion died. We will have the logs here, and there was no error message. So we've solved that small bug or that small problem we would have encountered as we were going forwards. Now that we have minions that can target each other, it'd be cool to get some sort of interaction between the player and the minions. So in this episode, what we'll do is we'll get the minions to target the player. And then the other thing I want to do in this episode is to set up the targeting of the player. So if we just find our player script, I believe it's here, and we just open that up. So now that we're in the player script, we're going to set up the code that we'll need for the player to follow a minion. So the first thing I'm going to do is create an int. We're going to call this layer, and we'll call it red minion. And that's equal to 10. And we'll do another one and call it blue minion. And that one will be equal to 9. The other thing I'll do is I'm just going to rename layer here and call it layer ground just for clarity. And it doesn't need to be a public variable, so I'll just delete that as well. And just change it down here where it was being used. Cool. The other variables we'll need to set up are the range of our character. So for now, I'll just make that public. Public float range, and we'll say 5. And then we'll also need a game object, and this will be our target. And we need a bool, and it's has target. And that will be equal to false. Okay, and then if we go down here, what we need to do is check if our raycast isn't hitting the ground layer, but instead is hitting one of our minions. So simply put, we'll just do in here, we'll do if hit.collider.gameObject.layer is equal to, and we'll do the blue minion layer first, so that should be fine. And then what we want to test is, so what we want to set up here is the target is equal to hit.collider.gameObject, and then the fact that we have a target is true, so has target equals true. So this is very simple. All we're doing here is saying, look, the game object of the minion that we hit is our target, and that it's that we have a target is true. Then from there, we'll need to make sure we're outside of the first if, and we're just in the void update. So I believe that's here. So we're in the update function, and we just need to type if has target. So if we have a target, then we need to tell the nav mesh agent to set destination, and that will be target.transform.position. Simple enough. That means our nav mesh will move towards the target, but we'll also need to make sure that we have a stopping distance so it's not running straight up to the target. Now this would vary depending whether the player character is ranged or melee. So that way, by setting our range variable, we can set it to 0, we can set it to 5, we can set it to whatever range we want. But here we'll just say stopping distance. So nav mesh agent dot stopping distance equals range. And oh yeah, I see the issue here. It's my nav mesh agent, and then stopping distance equals range. One of the problems we'll run into is once the nav mesh agent hits its target, it may stop its route. So what we can do is my nav mesh agent, if it's stopped, so is stopped dot is stopped equals true. Then what we want to do is say my nav mesh agent dot reset path. And a couple of bits of housekeeping we'll need to do here is also make sure that when we're setting the destination for when we just move normally, that we're actually saying to the game that the nav mesh agent stopping distance is 0, because it will always be 0 when moving to a point, and the fact that there is now no longer any target, so we'll say has target equals false. So if we just save that, I think that's everything, and we go back into the game. There's a few things we'll need to do. The first thing is if we go into the Minion prefab and go to target collider, we'll need to make sure that the layer it's on is the ignore raycast layer. This is a layer that's preset in Unity, and basically any raycast we set won't be targeted by it. And the simple reason is the minion has two colliders, the one on its body and this very large one that it uses to detect targets. We don't want our raycast hitting this because it will block out the minion and we'll never be able to click on the minion. So we just make sure that's on the correct layer. And another thing I'll do very quickly is I'll set the speed of the player to like 7 or something, just so it's a little bit faster. And then if we just click play, as you can see, the player can still move around, but it can also target a minion. So if we go here, and it will follow the minion up until the stopping distance. But it doesn't seem to be carrying on, so I'll just double check the code. Okay, so I realized this line of code wasn't necessary. I was using it in some of my testing. So if I just delete that out, and then if we go back to the game, what we'll see here is the player will be able to navigate as normal, but also follow minions. And it will start and stop as and when the minion gets out of its range. And so when we're doing an auto attack or an attack on the minion, the player will be able to run through that animation and potentially instantiate some sort of effect. So now that the player can follow a minion, what we want to do is start to address the player attacking the minion. So what we'll do is we'll just go into the player script and open that up. Now in the player script, what I'll want to do is firstly, I'm just going to comment out this variable because we're not using it right now, so it's giving an error message. And the other thing I want to do is set up a float, call it attack timer, and we'll say 2 for that. And then if we go down here, another thing we'll want to make sure is this script to follow a target should only happen if target does not equal null. Cool. Then the next bit of code that we need to bring up is pretty simple. It's just if target does not equal null, and then inside of here we'll need to do, I'm getting an error message because it's the wrong brackets. If target does not equal null, then what we need to do is then test if vector3 dot distance, and then we'll do between this game object, its transform dot position, comparing the distance of that to the target dot transform dot position. And then if we look at that, it should tell us, I need another curly bracket there. And what's the issue? Oh yeah, of course, this is an if statement, so it's less than or equal to the player range. Cool. And then from there, we just need to say, as long as we're in range, we're going to say the attack timer is minus equals to time dot delta time. So what this is saying is every frame that the character is in range of the minion, the attack timer is going to go down. And then if the attack timer is less than or equal to 0, then that means we can attack. So essentially the attack timer will run down to 0 and then we'll do whatever will be in this attack. So that simply would be, we would need to reset the timer also. So here I'm just hard coding in 2. When we're doing this properly and getting everything set up, we'll have an attack timer, but we'll also have the attack time variable. But for now, just going with it, I'll hard code that in, and then target dot get component dot get component minion AI script, and then we want to access the health variable. So we're essentially saying the target that we have is going to be a minion right now. So we know it has the minion AI script, we know we can access its health, and then we can take away 30 health. And then on top of that, we can do a debug.log just to double check. And we can do target get components and then look at its health. And that will just tell us the health of the minion that we're attacking. Another thing I've done quickly is I just commented out all our other debug logs. You can delete these, they're not important, it's just for testing really. But I just didn't want the logs to be filled with all the other ones, so we can just see this one. So if we go back into the engine, okay, from here we can press play. Okay, so he's following the minion, and we're getting error messages. So we're, yeah, perfect. So, or not error messages, we're getting logs saying we're killing the minion. Once its health goes below 0, it destroys the object. And because in the script we made sure our if statements only mentioned if there was a non-null target, we're not getting thrown any error messages, and we can walk around like normal once again. Perfect. So what's next is we'll probably just tap into the minions targeting the player. It's also worth noting there that obviously the player was following the minion and the timer was just running down. Once we start to add animations, once we start to add models in here, in a more standard mode, but what you'd probably see is the player attacking the minion. They would stand still, run through some sort of attack animation, probably around a second, and then either start moving again if the minions moved out of range, or they would hold their position and just run through the attack animation. But because we don't have those animations, because that isn't all set up, for now we're just doing like a rough draft of how all these systems will work, and then we can go back and change them as we may, depending on what we need. One thing we'll need to set up is we'll just need to make sure that we have a layer for, let's say, blue player and red side players. And that will just be layer 11 and 12. And we'll be using this to be able to let the minion knows which sort of player it can attack. And also another thing we'll need to do very quickly for the minion targeting is if we go into the script, we'll just want to make sure that we have a float and its health, and we'll just say player health can be 300. So going over to the minion targeting script, what we'll need to do is have it also target the player. So what we'll do here is on the trigger enter function, we're saying if the minion is blue, this is what it's going to do. So we're going to have to pass this out a little. So if the target list contains collider, so if the target isn't in already, then we're going to add it. That's good. What we actually need to do is remove this and put it actually inside of here. So what we'll do is we'll simplify that, and then we need a second if statement. And that if statement is going to say if the collider is on game object layer 10, which is a red minion, or if it's on layer 12, which is a red player. And then here we need to just change the ands to or. The reason why this can't all be in one thing is where it's an and condition and an or condition, so it can't be in one if statement. So we just move it down to here. And then if we just add the target to the list, and simply put, that should work. So now the player is being added to the list also. We'll do the same below, but what we'll do is it's now layer 11 and layer 9 because it's looking for, because it's not a blue minion, it's a red minion, therefore we're looking for a blue minion, if that all makes sense. So now if we just go back into the game, we can see that the minion should just swarm the player instantly, though we're probably going to get some error messages. Oh no, of course, the player needs to be set to red player, as we haven't set that in the player code just yet. And as you can see, the minions are swarming the player. But as I suggested, we were going to get a error message, and this is because in one of the lines, we're asking the minions to target the minion AI script and then target the health, and the player doesn't have that script, it just has its player script. So we'll need to go in and change that AI code. Okay, so to sort the error we were getting, if we just go into the minion AI script, and what we'll need to do is here we'll need to test the component rather than just straight out getting it. So we'll make an if statement here instead, and we'll say target minion dot get, actually no, try get component, and then we'll say out, and then we'll say minion AI script, and then we'll call this minion target script. So if this is true, then we'll say minion target script dot health minus equals 30, and then we just do the exact same again, but instead we're going to say try get component, and we'll say player script, and I think it's called player script 1, and then we'll just rename the player target script, and then here. So we'll try and get both components, and then it'll take away the health. One thing we need to do first is make sure that the health variable here is public, so that it can be accessed by other scripts. So that will solve that error. And something, I also need to delete the old get component. Cool, so that's all good now. One thing I may do also is, let's see, I'll probably rename target minion just to target, right? Because it lacks clarity, and it isn't just targeting minions now, it's targeting other things. So here we'll just need to rename all of these to target. Doesn't change anything other than the fact that the minion's not just targeting minions, and so if the variable has a better name, it's just a little bit more clear what it's doing. And then if we go back into Unity, we're getting an error. Oh, I missed one of the target minions, I believe. Target minion. Here, we would say target here in the minion targeting script, and no other error messages. So we go back into Unity, and now we should be able to see that the minions will attack the player. Let's see, and then the player will lose health. So if we click on the player, and we see the player health, because it's a public variable, we can see it in the inspector, and it's going down. So yeah, in this episode we were able to cover targeting minions and also having minions target the player. Obviously a lot of stuff is still rough around the edges, and as we start to add animations and character models and whatnot, it will be able to clean up some of those edges. If you've enjoyed the video and if you're enjoying the series, please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you want to support the channel, I'll put a link down to the Patreon below in the comments. Thank you very much.